I worked as an attendant at an old bowling alley that had been around for over 50 years. The place had a certain charm, with its vintage decor and worn wooden lanes that had seen countless games over the decades. The walls were adorned with old photographs and trophies from tournaments long past, giving the alley a nostalgic feel. Despite its age, the alley was well maintained and still attracted a steady stream of customers during the day. However, the atmosphere changed dramatically during the night shift. As the last of the bowlers left and the lights dimmed, the alley took on an eerie, almost oppressive quietness. The usual sounds of laughter and rolling balls gave way to the creaks and groans of the old buildings settling. The only light came from the dim, flickering bulbs above the lanes, casting long, unsettling shadows. It was during these late hours, while I was closing up, that the true age and history of the bowling alley seemed to come alive. The silence was thick, broken only by the occasional distant hum of the pin setters resetting themselves. Working alone at night, I often felt a strange sense of unease, as if the alley was watching me. Despite the unsettling quiet, I took pride in my work. My duties included cleaning up the lanes, organizing the rental shoes, and ensuring everything was in order for the next day. It was a routine I had grown accustomed to, though I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the place during those lonely hours. Little did I know, one night would change my perception of the bowling alley forever. As I went about my usual tasks, I was about to experience something that would make me question the stories and rumors I had heard from my colleagues about the alley's haunted past. One night, as I was finishing up my closing duties, I heard a sound that sent a chill down my spine. The unmistakable rumble of a bowling ball rolling down a lane, followed by the clatter of pins being knocked down. It was so out of place in the otherwise silent alley that I froze, straining to listen. I was alone, and the alley was supposed to be empty. I had already ensured that all the customers had left and had begun the process of shutting everything down. My first thought was that perhaps someone had snuck in, but the idea seemed unlikely. Curiosity and a sense of duty drove me to investigate. I grabbed my flashlight and made my way to the lanes. The sound had come from the far end, near lane 7. The eerie quietness of the alley amplified my footsteps, each one echoing off the walls and adding to the sense of unease. The flickering lights above the lanes cast unsettling shadows, making the familiar setting feel alien and threatening. When I reached lane 7, I shone my flashlight down its length, expecting to see a stray ball or maybe even a mischievous late-night bowler. But the lane was empty. There were no balls, no pins knocked over, nothing to explain the noise I had just heard. I checked the other lanes, but they too were devoid of any activity. A creeping sensation of being watched began to settle over me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was observing my every move. The alley, so vibrant and full of life during the day, felt like a haunted relic of the past in those moments. I stood there for a few minutes, listening intently, hoping to catch any sound that might explain what I had heard. But the silence had returned, more oppressive than ever. The only sound was the faint hum of the overhead lights and the distant clinks of the pin setters resetting in the darkness. Despite finding nothing out of the ordinary, the unease stayed with me. I couldn't ignore the sense of being watched, the way the shadows seemed to move just out of the corner of my eye. I decided it was best to return to the reception area, trying to shake off the creeping fear that had settled in my bones. As I reluctantly turned to leave lane 7, a sudden chill swept through the air. The temperature seemed to plummet in an instant, leaving a biting cold that seeped into my bones. I shivered uncontrollably, hugging myself for warmth, and my breath came out in visible puffs. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a shadowy figure at the far end of the lane. I turned my flashlight towards it, the beam cutting through the dim light. There, at the end of lane 7, stood a figure, partially obscured by shadows. It was tall and indistinct, almost as if it was a part of the darkness itself. My heart raced as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. The figure seemed to be bowling. I watched in stunned silence as it bent down, picked up an invisible ball and rolled it down the lane. The sound of the ball rolling was unmistakable, followed by the crash of pins being knocked over. But the figure itself was eerily silent, its movements smooth and fluid, like a ghostly apparition reenacting a scene from long ago. I felt a surge of fear and disbelief. How could this be happening? There was no one there, just a shadowy figure performing an impossible action. My rational mind struggled to find an explanation, but the chilling realization began to set in. I was witnessing something supernatural. Summoning every ounce of courage, I decided to approach the figure, my flashlight trembling in my hand. As I took a step forward, the figure seemed to notice me. It paused mid-motion, its head turning slowly in my direction. The intense cold grew even sharper, and a sense of dread washed over me. Just as I was about to call out, the figure vanished. One moment it was there, and the next, it dissolved into the shadows, leaving no trace behind. The sound of pins falling echoed through the empty alley, a haunting reminder of what I had just witnessed. I stood there, frozen in place, my mind racing. The figure was gone, but the oppressive cold and the lingering sense of being watched remained. The reality of what had just happened hit me like a tidal wave. I was alone in an old bowling alley, confronted by a ghostly presence that defied all logic and reason. Shaken by the eerie encounter, I quickly retreated to the reception area, hoping to find some solace in the familiar surroundings. The oppressive cold still lingered, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I took a few deep breaths, trying to calm my racing heart, but the fear gnawed at me, refusing to let go. As I settled back into my chair behind the counter, the unsettling sounds began again. The unmistakable rumble of a bowling ball rolling down a lane, followed by the crash of pins being knocked over, echoed through the empty alley. My hands trembled, and I clutched the edge of the counter, my knuckles white. The sound seemed to come from different lanes, as if an invisible bowler was moving from one to the next. Each time I gathered the courage to investigate, I found nothing. No balls, no fallen pins, and certainly no one playing a late-night game. The lanes remained empty, but the noises persisted, growing more frequent and more unnerving. Every creak of the old building, every flicker of the dim lights, seemed to amplify the eerie atmosphere. The alley, which had once felt like a second home, now felt alien and hostile. My growing fear was compounded by the inability to find the source of the sounds. The rational part of my mind searched for explanations, faulty pin setters, echoes from the building's old pipes, but nothing fit the reality of what I was experiencing. As the night dragged on, the sounds continued unabated. I tried to distract myself with small tasks, cleaning and organizing the reception area, but every crash of pins would jolt me back into a state of heightened anxiety. The rolling balls seemed to mock my fear, a relentless reminder of the ghostly presence I had encountered. I considered leaving the alley, but the thought of walking through the dark, deserted lanes to the exit filled me with dread. Instead, I hunkered down behind the counter, my ears straining to track the noises, my mind racing with a mixture of fear and confusion. The hours stretched on interminably, each minute feeling like an eternity. The relentless sounds wore me down, sapping my courage and leaving me feeling helpless. By the time the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows, I was exhausted, my nerves frayed to the breaking point. As the first rays of sunlight pierced through the windows, the oppressive fear that had gripped me all night began to slowly dissipate. My colleagues started to arrive for their morning shifts, bringing with them the comforting sounds of daily life, the hum of conversation, the clatter of equipment being prepared for the day's work. I felt a wave of relief, but the memories of the night were still fresh and raw. Gathering my courage, I shared my harrowing experience with my colleagues, recounting the sounds of the bowling balls, the crashing pins, and the shadowy figure I had seen at Lane 7. As I spoke, I could see the expressions on their faces change from curiosity to a mixture of sympathy and recognition. One of the senior attendants, an older man who had worked at the alley for decades, nodded knowingly. "You're not the first to see the ghost on Lane 7, he said, his voice filled with a calm acceptance. "Over the years, many of us have experienced the same thing. Sounds of bowling when the lanes are empty and that shadowy figure. It's almost like a part of the alley's history now." Others chimed in, sharing their own stories of eerie encounters and unexplained phenomena during their night shifts. The realization that I wasn't alone in this experience was both comforting and unsettling. It seemed that the alley had its own resident ghost, a spectral bowler forever haunting Lane 7. Despite the shared experiences, I knew one thing for certain: I would never work alone at night again. The terror I had felt, the sense of being watched, and the relentless sounds had left an indelible mark on me. The old bowling alley, with its rich history and nostalgic charm, had revealed a darker, more sinister side that I couldn't ignore. Even in the light of day, the memory of that night haunted me. The sounds of bowling balls and falling pins echoed in my mind, and I couldn't shake the image of the shadowy figure. The experience had changed the way I viewed the alley, turning a place of work into a place of unease. The fear lingered, a constant companion that reminded me of the ghostly presence I had encountered. Every time I walked past Lane 7, a shiver would run down my spine, and I would find myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see the figure standing there, bowling in silence. The experience had left a lasting impact on me, a haunting reminder that some places carry echoes of the past, shadows that refuse to fade. The old bowling alley, with its creaks and groans, its flickering lights and long history, would forever be etched in my memory as a place where the past and the present intertwined in the most unsettling way.